Hey, welcome to Season 6 of the Two Text Podcast. I'm here with my co-host David Harvey, and my name is John Andrews. So this is a podcast of two friends from two different countries meeting every 2 weeks to talk about the Bible. Each week we pick one text to talk about, which invariably leads to us talking about two texts and often many more. Now this season we're exploring Jesus' I am sayings in John's Gospel and how they draw us into a bigger vision of who Jesus is. Hey David, so last time we began a conversation for real into the I ams of John's Gospel. We spent a few episodes setting the conversation up in both Tanakh and then moving into John's Gospel introduction. But it was so exciting last time to actually start leaning into our John 6 passage. And if any of our listeners missed the last one, really you do need to pick up the last one before probably listening to this one. And we dived into chapter 6 of John, read a chunk of it, but talked about how the context of it, that Jesus feeding the 5,000, Jesus walking on the water, were all huge nudges towards Moses. But then Jesus picks up this explicit reference. It's not Moses who's giving you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives it. And we left that on that incredible moment. I think you summarized it brilliantly, where it wasn't just about what Jesus was saying he was, but it was also Jesus now challenging and questioning what has been and the interpretation of what had been, as well as an understanding of where that had left the people. And this brought us to this amazing point in verse 34 of John 6, where the people are speaking, responding then to this idea that the Father gives this true bread from heaven. He says, Jesus says, for the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. And you get this sort of lovely moment. You always give us this bread, verse 34. Can we have this bread? Please, Lord, give it to us. Evermore give us this bread. And so there's this sort of, clearly Jesus, forgive the pun, has whet the appetite in these people by talking about this amazing bread that's come down from heaven. And they're now saying, okay, if the manna was a sort of a shadow of this amazing bread, well, please, Lord, give this bread to us, which of course then sets up the amazing response of Jesus. And there's a little echo for me, David, again, in the woman at the well. It's like Jesus says to the woman at the well, well, if you knew who it was that's speaking to you and the water that he essentially has to offer, you would be asking him for a drink. And then she goes, well, okay, you haven't got anything to draw with, but yes, come on. And it piques her interest, which then leads to an incredible declaration of Jesus where he says to her, the one speaking to you, I am. In that respect, possibly the first soft I am in the Gospel of John, which in a million years' time or so we'll get back to. But it does set up Jesus' response in verse 35, where then he's able to declare explicitly and categorically, I am the bread of life. So he is identifying himself as the one given by the Father and the one who has come down from heaven and gives life to the world. So it's a brilliant piece of argument from Jesus. It's a brilliant piece of preparing the people, almost leading them to the point where he's looked back at the manna, but now he's set something up for this bread from heaven, which of course leads the people to ask the question, well, okay then, where is it? Give it to us. And it's at that point that Jesus answered, well, actually, I'm it. I am the bread of life.
You pick up on that really important. I mean, I'm so excited. You mentioned the woman at the well, because I was thinking exactly that. And I, without trying to explain my internal thoughts to our listeners, but while you were talking, I was thinking, should I interrupt and say, hey, what about the woman at the well? But you got there and you were going there anyway, sort of thing. So this is just sight that you and I spend too much time together, that I was thinking what you were thinking. But that notion of give us this always, give us this living water, give us this bread. And actually Jesus's response echoes so much what he says to the woman. But it struck me that what you then get playing in this is this theme then of temporary and permanent. Right? So like this bread, right? Look at how many times in the speech, we read the whole thing in the last episode, how many times the phrase at the last day, that this bread that Jesus is going to give is going to last forever. To the woman in the well, this water you will thirst again. To the people in this crowd, slightly less politically correct, Jesus says, yes, your ancestors did eat bread in the desert. But I mean, to put it bluntly, then Jesus is like, but I don't see any of them around right now. Where are they? Oh, they're all dead. Which is, I mean, it's pretty rough. I mean, the people of Israel who trusted God and lived through the desert, Jesus, his summation of them is, yeah, but they're all dead. It's probably not. Politically, it's not the way to warm people to yourself. So you see this slight harsh side of Jesus, which is like, I'm not going to scurry around the facts here. So the people that drink at Jacob's well in John 4, yep, they keep coming back here. Yes, it's a lovely well, Jesus says. Yes, it's got a great history behind it. But you're here every day gathering water from it. I am eternal water. Yes, it's a lovely history in the desert. Yes, it's true that God was absolutely faithful to the people. But again, every day the manna came and then now they're dead. So you get this, the soft I am in John 4, but now this, let's call it the strong I am then here, that eternal significance of I am the bread of heaven, and it will take you to the last day. It will give you eternal life. It will raise you up. Do you know what I mean? It's really fascinating to me how the I am statements speak to the permanence of Jesus. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. And I love the fact that Jesus is creating here an inquisitiveness that for those that are hungry, for those that are thirsty, it will draw them into. Now, of course, the further we get into the discourse, the more potentially controversial it gets, because he unpacks bread from what seems like, okay, a generic concept to language where, right, eat my flesh and drink my blood. So it really does get very, very tasty and very edgy very, very quickly in terms of the conversation. But he is provoking their interest. He's jabbing at them in the hope that they will grasp at him and try to lean into that. I love the little allusion in the story, manna. If you look at the Exodus 16 text, there's a little bit of humor almost, because the people end up calling it manna, but the first question in Hebrew is manhu, and it, of course it sounds funny in English. It sounds like they're saying man as in who, WHO, but it literally, when they looked at the manna for the first time, they said manhu, which literally means what is it? So manna sort of takes its meaning from, which isn't very exciting, but every time they said manna, it provokes a question. What is it? And of course, even though they came to understand what it was and were able to cook it, bake it, eat it, enjoy it in 95 different varieties, it still was mysterious. It still was other. This was not like bread you make. This is bread that came down from heaven, and it crystallized on the floor, and how they called it was absolutely right. Manhu, what is this? What is this? And in a sense, I think this is what's happening in the discourse as well. That Jesus, I think, if I hope I'm not overcooking Jesus here, I think Jesus is sort of playing on what is this? He's actually leaning into this idea that he now is the bread that's come down from heaven, though he's standing there right in front of them, though he looks like a man, just as the manna looked like bread. Everybody knows that bread wasn't like ordinary bread, that it was some mysterious, supernatural, other, glorious about this bread, even though you could cook it and eat it and taste it, right? And there's an allusion to that, I think, in Jesus. At one level, we're looking at him and he looks like an ordinary man, an ordinary Jewish man. Yet, because we're following John's trajectory, we know he's other, he's come from above, he's different, he is unique, he is the I am among us. And there's a sense in which I think Jesus is almost provoking the inquisitiveness of the people in the fact that the one now standing before him is declaring himself to be the I am, the bread of life, the bread that has come down from heaven. Yet they're looking at him going, but hold on a minute. We know your father, and we know your mother, and we know where you're from, and we know actually you live just over the hill in Nazareth. So what's going on here? And I think just as the ancients were confused and mesmerized and mystified by the man who, by the what is it, I think the same thing is happening in John 6. What is this? Who is this? And how do we understand this?
I mean, there's a stunning, I was thinking as you were saying, there's a stunning resonance of even, it's not explicit, but there's even this level of that Manu is like, almost as if Jesus is saying, well, listen, even when God did feed you in the desert, it wasn't like you immediately understood what was happening.
Yeah.
So the question and the being uncertain is the human condition. And once we figured out it's manna, we then act like we always knew what it was, and therefore we're now really, really clever. And it's like when you watch a really complex movie and you didn't figure it out, and then you figure out the end, and then you show it to your friend and make out like you always saw it coming.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like that they're acting like, yeah, but our ancestors, they knew what was going on. And I think that it's interesting, isn't it, that there's even that irony in the text of what you're saying, of that, what is it, that Manu. I was just thinking as you were saying this, they come to Jesus, so they find him. They've chased him around the lake. They've done a couple of loops, and they find him. And he says, you're looking for me, not because you saw the signs, because you ate loaves and had your full, right?
Yeah.
And they then say, well, what do we need to do then? And Jesus says, believe the one he sent, right? And then they say this, and this is stunning. So bear in mind, we've had the feeding of the 5,000 with all of its illusions. We've had the walking on the water with all of its illusions. And this is their reply to Jesus, like literally the next morning. What sign will you give us so that we may see it and believe it? What will you do? Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. I mean, if you're to believe, which I do, if you're to believe what the disciples were saying at the start of the chapter, is like, if we don't feed these people, right, they're not getting home. Like they're on the edge of starvation. And Jesus has fed them from 5 loaves and 2 fish. And their question to Jesus the next morning is, well, we would really like a sign that you're better than Moses, because he fed us when we had no food. And I think there's intentionally irony. It's like as if the writer John is saying, well, that literally was what happened yesterday.
That's right.
Like, you're remembering what happened to your ancestors in the desert, but quite literally yesterday, Jesus fed you when you had no food. And so there's this real irony of misunderstanding going on, that how can you ask Jesus at this exact moment for a sign?
Absolutely. I think it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant. And I think, again, there's a lovely wee allusion to the Exodus story where if you read Exodus 16, not only, does the manna come, but Moses gives explicit instructions on how to behave around it. So, you only collect enough for each day. And, when it comes to day 6, you can collect 2 omers, and that'll last you for Shabbat, and everything will be fine. And people constantly disobey. They forget the words of Moses. They disobey the words of Moses. They grumble against the words of Moses. So at the one minute in Exodus 16, they are experiencing a dramatic supernatural provisional miracle, while at the same time, still, like, messing around with the rules and bending the advice of Moses and twisting it to the point where, some of them try and keep it overnight and it ends up getting, the maggots start eating and it stinks and Moses gets angry with them. So you've got the forgetfulness of people in the Exodus 16 story. They literally forget the minute it's out of Moses' mouth. They've forgotten the instruction. And he says, now you don't need to go out and collect it in Shabbat because you've got enough. And people still went out and looked for it on Shabbat. And of course, there was none there. So you get again this allusion to the manna in the wilderness experience where at the same time, a supernatural provisional event takes place, people forget. And here, literally, bellies are still filled from the miracle that happened the day before, and already they're going, oh, okay, we need something else. We need another sign. We need another miracle. So again, it shows what Jesus is contending with constantly in and around the situation, and that when he speaks of bread, then they are looking for some sort of manna-esque sign. And of course, John is arguing, you already got that, and 12 basketfuls were left over. So just open your eyes, and you'll make the dots will actually connect on this. So it isn't. I think again another gorgeous allusion to the Moses story that is tucked away there, hidden in plain sight in the John 6 story.
I mean, to be fair, John, to them, it's kind of also what Jesus is dealing with me on a relatively regular basis as well. I remember my spiritual director once saying to me, I was telling him about some kind of just real tender moment that I'd had in my devotional life. And my spiritual director was like, well, have you written all of that down? And I was like, oh, no, probably not. And he's like, well, like, maybe you're going to need that again. Like maybe what you felt the Lord say to you in this particular moment, you'll need again. And you're going to go in 2 years' time and be like, oh, give me a word, Lord. And he's like, well, this is the same question you asked 2 years ago, and I answered it back then. So there's this and I don't mean that, I mean that to support everything that you've said.
No, it's right.
But there's a level where what John is also doing in the cleverness of his gospel is going, by the way, this is you, the reader, as well. Like we're very, I mean, my goodness. I mean, God's grace to me has been huge over the course of my life, but my memory is very short of it. And I don't know if that's your experience as well, but sometimes I find myself praying, and the gentleness of God is to remind me, well, you actually know this. You're still, you're still here, and I'm still supporting you and with you. Do you know what I mean?
Of course, and isn't it interesting that when you get to the end of John 6, it's interesting that Jesus invites his disciples to leave.
Yeah.
And of course, Peter's response is really dramatic. He says, well, where could we go? You alone have the words of eternal life. So actually, it's interesting then that Peter, in a heroic moment, a great moment, Peter is remembering. Yes. Peter is okay. I was there at the feeding of the 5,000. I get that, but actually, this is about more than that. This is about something else. And he literally declares him to be the Holy One of God, which is a very very dynamic statement that Peter makes there. So you do get that tension of forgetfulness, and I suppose that's why in the book of Deuteronomy, as the people of God are about to enter the land of promise, that Moses relentlessly tells them, remember, do not forget, remember, do not forget, remember, do not forget. I mean, it's over and over and over again in the sort of Deuteronomy text as they are about, because we as humans are desperately prone to forget and move on to the next thing and move on to the next sign. And okay, Lord, that was yesterday. What about today? And actually, well, hold on a minute. The food that I gave you yesterday is still literally digesting in your body. Why don't you live in that for a moment within the context of that? So again, contending with the fact he's given them publicly a miraculous sign with the crowds, and then privately an incredible miraculous sign to the 12 by walking on the water. So two amazing signs have been given before we get to sort of their request for yet another sign from Jesus. So yeah, it's powerful stuff, I think.
And it strikes me at that point that the way that you phrased that right there, and there's way more to still say about this passage, but the way that you phrased it right there makes me want to just point out that when you get to then verse 53, you realize that there's a very strong, I mean, like explicit allusion
Hmm.
to the church's practice of communion, right?
Yeah.
So, like, and the reason I bring that up right now is to think about, like, do this in remembrance of
Remember?
me. It's
Mhm.
like in the narrative of we forget, we forget, we forget, we forget. It's interesting that what Jesus leaves his disciples with is a practice that will remember. Right, and I do think that in the ancient mind, the notion of remembering is an active thing. It's not
Yeah.
just like think back about it. That in the replaying the Passover meal of Jesus, you are remembering him and what he's done. It's almost as if Jesus is like, listen, I spent 3 years of ministry with these people. They forget things really quickly. So
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a something to do that will ensure that this doesn't get lost and doesn't
Mm.
get forgotten, because this is the
Mm.
act, the giving up of his body and the pouring out of his blood for us is
Mm.
the eternal life that we're looking for. So it's fascinating to me that we get in John 6:53 essentially
Mm.
John's communion story, because
Yeah.
you don't get
Yeah.
a Last Supper in John's gospel.
Very good. Very
Um,
good.
and that might be a surprise to some people that you go, no, that can't be
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But you do get this discourse here about him being the bread of life, which contains within it words that sound like, if you were to read this at a communion service,
True.
most people would be like, oh, yeah, that works. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. I love that, and John in that sort of Last Supper discourse gives us so much that the other writers don't. Of course, we get
Mm,
millions of details from John in those chapters 13 through to 17. Absolutely incredible. But of course, he doesn't explicitly give us what we call the Last Supper.
mm,
We rely on the synoptics for that, which is true. But I love his language. You quoted 53. I love 55. For my flesh is real food, and my blood is real drink. And again,
mm,
it's back to that permanence and temporariness that you alluded to there earlier on, that I think again we're seeing that Jesus is offering us something that if we partake of this
mm,
creates real life. This is real drink. This is
mm,
not something that we will be hungry again on, or this is not something we will be thirsty again on. And again, at the
mm,
heart of that is that remembrance idea. And I would argue, and I love your idea of active remembrance. I think that a biblical worldview of remembrance always involves activity. I think you
mm,
remember by doing something. You remember by, I think, in the very act of taking the bread and taking the cup, I am
mm,
remembering. It is the act of remembrance, and I think we must not forget what he has
mm,
given to us, and that lovely allusion of John that this is his sort of last supper
mm,
nudge, and again when we get to that final supper and he does hold up the bread and says, "This is my body," you are hearing John. This is
mm.
my blood given as a new covenant. You are hearing John. So it
Yeah.
doesn't shock us, and it's probably later on that those lovely disciples themselves put all that together and make those gorgeous connections. But it is magnificent. And again, I love the sort of allusion in verse 58. This is the bread that came down from heaven. This is a number of times he said this to us,
Mm,
that he's come down from heaven, just as the manna rained down from heaven. The
mm,
Son has come. The
yeah.
bread has come from heaven. And actually, he makes this explicit. Your ancestors ate the manna and died, but whoever feeds on this bread will live
Mm,
forever. And it's fascinating that he makes those comments in the context of a synagogue, in the context
mm.
of
Yes.
probably expounding in some way the teaching of the Word of
Mm,
God. So, although it seems like a sort of a random conversation, it's probably part of some sort of synagogue engagement and connection there at that lovely synagogue in Capernaum. So, it's fascinating, really. Mhm.
I mean, there's two things that strike me as really, really fun in there. One, when they found him on the other side of the lake, Jesus has run away from them trying to make him king by force, crossed the water by walking on it. And eventually, like if you literally just take the text at its value, you don't find this until the very end of the chapter of the paragraph, to your point. But where they found him is he's hidden out in the synagogue. He's
Yeah.
gone back to be with the law, to be
Mhm.
with the word of God. You know what I mean? So there's a level of what has Jesus done when he's been threatened by people trying to undo the work of God in him and
Mm.
make him a forceful king? He's gone back to the place in his village where the scroll of the words of the Lord are kept. And my guess would be he's there in prayer, he's there in
Mm.
scripture.
Mm.
And then what happens when they then challenge him is the truth of God just oozes out of him. So there's a
Mm.
wonderful little, I mean, it's implicit. And John wants you to wait until the very end to find it out. That if you're not careful, when they found him on the other side of the lake, you imagine him standing by the shore, right? But then the big reveal is, look where Jesus has gone. He's
Yeah.
retreated from the crowd's political evil desires to the place in his community or the place in that community
Yeah.
where the word of God and prayer happens. I think that's really, really beautiful.
It's
Um,
gorgeous.
and I was thinking as well when you said this that, without trying to, make an overly hard leveraged point that I think is very dear to me, but you and I have talked about this before. So, I'm alluding to that. Like a passage like 653 to 58 also gives us a reminder of why I think the church wants to not ever let itself get to a place that we don't take communion seriously,
True.
right?
True.
Like I was thinking as you were speaking in John 15, the invitation of Jesus is remain in me. Right?
Yeah.
And that says like I am the vine, you are the branches, but you must remain in me,
Mm.
and you will bear much fruit. And we might ask then, well, how do I remain in Him? And
Mm.
of course, the answer is actually given here in chapter 6, right?
Yeah.
That there's, and again, I don't want to, over leverage it, but the answer is, those who eat my flesh and drink my blood remain in me and I in
Yeah.
them. And there's
Yeah.
this sort of, when you look at how early Christian history unfolds, they just take this seriously, that us
Yeah.
coming, doing this in remembrance of him is actually part of how we remain in him. It's
Come on.
clearly it's
Come
a
on.
work of the Spirit. I'm not trying to undo any of that, but you can start to see why the early Christians like just took Jesus at his word.
Yeah.
That you told us to do this, and then in John's gospel you told us that, by the way, this is how you remain.
Mm.
and it sort of shows you why I think anyway a great renewal that would happen in the church would be if we just start to take Jesus seriously at face value on these practices.
Yeah. Yeah. Completely. And I think it's a beautiful reminder to us of both, again, thinking of the connection between manna and Jesus, that at one level, the simplicity of these ideas, bread and cup, there is, okay, these are everyday things in our lives at one level. And yet both manna and gloriously, more magnificently, Jesus elevate what seems like, okay, things we know, elevates them to a level of otherness and mystery and worship and humility and love. And once we start to take those things for granted, once we start to get used to that idea, I think that's when our hearts drift away from the remaining. And actually, it's coming back to both the simplicity of the symbols that are represented, but also the mystery of the bread, that he is in the bread, the mystery of the cup, he is in the cup, the fact that when I partake of these things, I partake in a glorious way of him, and I am remaining in him. And of course, the the partaking of the bread and the cup, both in the John 6 sense, but also in the wider Eucharistic sense and Last Supper sense, is it's drawing me away from me. It's
Mm,
drawing me away from who I am, what I want, what I need. And it's drawing me into the glorious mystery of this man, this person who came down from heaven and
mm,
did what he did. And like four times in the text, in one form or another, he declares himself to be the bread. Bread
mm,
from heaven, I am the bread of life. I mean, it's four times it's repeated. It's of all the I am sayings, it's the one he repeats the most
mm,
in his language. So we get, when we eventually get to sort of I am the good shepherd, there's a double reference in there.
mm,
But actually no other I am gets the repeat that I am the bread of life gets from the
mm.
words of Jesus,
Yeah.
from the mouth of Jesus. So as an introductory I am, if I can use that crude language, as an introductory I am, he's saying something. You must eat this. You must participate of this. This must become in you, and you must imbibe it into your very being. Because if you imbibe me into your very being, then you will live. You will have life within you, and you will truly live. And I think that's absolutely crucial. And I think the Last Supper, the Lord's Supper, breaking of bread, Eucharist, these things sit at the very heart of that idea. And
Mm,
I think it's a mistake to push them to the fringe of our experience. I think
mm,
this must remain central because it is one of the few things that Jesus told us to do explicitly, from his own words. And it's one of the few things he told us to actually do because it's a key to remembering him.
mm,
And I think remembering is part of remaining.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, I love that, John. And I think there's something beautifully elemental about I am the bread as well. I mean, this is maybe more information than people need, but I often think this when I stop at the gas station to put fuel in my car, right? And I often think about the whole journey of having to take my car, choose the right pump, choose the right quality of fuel, pay the money to put it in the car, stand there in my context for most of the year in the freezing cold, you filling it up. And often this thought strikes me because my local petrol station also has a burger bar in it, right?
Mm.
And I think about the fact that we go through all this process to make the oil into the fuel that I can put in my car. And then I think to myself, I know a lot about how that works. Like I know the science of how all of that works. And I also kind of know the science of how it works when I stuff bread in my mouth. I stop being hungry. But
Yeah.
there's also a level of just, I think to myself often how amazing the human body is that you just kind of stuff stuff in your mouth. And basically, good bread, bad bread, a bit of bacon, a sausage, some burger, tomato, and I just kind of throw it all in. If I did that to my car, it's done. But God
Yeah.
designed us that you just kind of throw this stuff in and it becomes
Yeah.
energy. And
Yeah.
most of us pay no attention to it whatsoever. But
Mm.
yet we're very, very quickly aware when it runs out, right? And all of a sudden, hey, I'm really hungry, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a beautiful invitation here to think of Jesus like bread, but
Mm.
both to your point at the deeply elevated levels, but then also at the profoundly simple levels of what if our hunger for bread we allowed to echo our own hunger for
Yeah.
Jesus. Right?
Yeah.
That actually Jesus told me, eat this bread, remember me regularly. I mean, the evidence we have from the early churches, they were always doing this. Like, let's
Yes.
never forget Jesus. And to your point, I think there is a sort of thing in us sometimes now that's like, well, it's not that important. And I wonder what our spiritual devotion would look like if we heard, I am the bread of life, and thought to ourselves, what if I treated
Mm.
Jesus the
Mm.
same way as I actually treat bread, right?
Mm.
Wherein, and if we use bread as a metaphor for food,
Mm.
invariably there's not a day goes by that I, don't have food.
Mm.
And yet, in truth, I know that my body's more than capable of going multiple days without food.
Yeah.
And yet, I never do that, right?
Yeah.
It's also truth that I'm able to go multiple days without Jesus. And I do that all the time. right?
Yeah.
And there's this lovely invitation from Jesus, I think, when he says, I am the bread of life, to just hear of him as our food and be invited to think of him devotionally with that level of need and dependence.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. No, I love that. I absolutely love that. And I was just, as you were speaking, I was just looking at the incredible, the words of Jesus, the four references. Verse 35, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Just take this, as you said, just take the simplicity of those words and just accept them. Verse 41, he says, in response, I am the bread that came down from heaven. So it's not just ordinary bread, it's heaven bread. Verse 48, I am the bread of life, an emphatic statement. And in the last one, verse 51, I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. This bread is my flesh, and which I will give for the life of the world. And just there is a simplicity to this appeal, isn't there? That at one level, there's a mystery to this. What does it mean to eat Jesus? And yet at another level, there's an intuitive simplicity that a child could grasp that. Well, Jesus is saying, eat me, take me into your being. Let me sit at the center of who you are. Treat me in a way that actually you realize I am essential. I am essential for life. And of course, it's a glorious, I'm sure our listeners know this, but of course, Jesus was born in a city called House of Bread, Bethlehem. And you get this sort of lovely sense of lechem, this bread that would be an everyday experience for people in the world of Jesus. And the one who now declares himself to be the bread of life was born in a city called the House of Bread. And here he is emerging from the House of Bread now as the bread to feed us. And you know what, David? I think, again, we've marveled at the mystery of this passage. We've marveled at the intertextuality. We've marveled at the genius of the writer. And yet there's also a glorious simplicity to this, that Jesus says, eat me and live. Eat me and live. Make me an essential, the essential component of your world. And if you do, you'll live and you'll never be hungry again. So that's it for this episode. Now, we know there's always more to explore, and we encourage you to dive into the text and do that. If you like this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you rated it, reviewed, or shared it. We also appreciate all our listeners who financially support the show, sharing the weight of producing the podcast. If you'd like to support us, visit twotext.com. But that's all for now. So until next time, from David and I, it's goodbye.